against the king's camp. Then the king, rising very early, marched fiercely with his host towards Beth Zacharias, where his armies made them ready to battle and servants to fight. They showed them the blood of graces among the armies. And for every elephant they appointed 1,000 men, armed with coats of mail and with helmets of brass on their heads. And beside this, for every beast were ordained 500 horsemen of the best. These were ready at every occasion. Wheresoever the beast was, and wheresoever the beast went, they went also, neither departed they from him. And upon the beasts were there strong towers of wood, which covered every one of them, and were girt fast unto them with devices. There were also upon every one 32 strong men that fought upon them, beside the Indian that ruled him. As for the remnant of the horsemen, they set them on this side and on that side at the 2 parts of the host, giving them signs what to do, and being harnessed all over amidst the ranks. Now when the sun shone upon the shields of gold and brass, the mountains glistened therewith, and shined like lamps of fire. So part of the king's army, being spread arched on safely and in order. Wherefore all that heard the noise of their multitude, and the marching of the company, and the rattling of the harness were moved. For the army was very great and mighty, and entered into battle. And there were slain of the king's army 600 men. Eleazar also, surnamed Savaran, perceiving that one of the beasts armed with royal harness was higher than all the rest, and supposing that the king was upon him, put himself in jeopardy to the end he might deliver his people and get him a perpetual name. Wherefore he ran upon him courageously through the midst of the battle, slaying on the right hand and on the left, so that they were divided from him on both sides, which done, he crept under the elephant, and thrust him under, and slew him. Whereupon the elephant fell down upon him, and there he died. Howbeit the rest of the Jews, seeing the strength of the king and the violence of his forces, turned away from them. Then the king's army went up to Jerusalem to meet them, and the king pitched his tents against Judea and against Mount Sion. But with them that were in Bethsura he made peace. For they came out of the city because they had no victuals there to endure the siege, it being a year of rest to the land. So the king took Bethsura and set a garrison there to keep it. As for the sanctuary, he besieged it many days, and set there artillery with engines and instruments to cast fire and stones, and pieces to cast darts and slings. Whereupon they also made engines against their engines, and held them in battle a long season. Yet at the last, their vessels being without victuals, for that it was the 7th year, and they in Judea that were delivered from the Gentiles had eaten up the residue of the store, there were but a few left in the sanctuary, because the famine did so prevail against them that they were fain to disperse themselves, every man to his own place. At that time Lysias heard say that Philip, whom Antiochus the king, whilst he lived, had appointed to bring up his son Antiochus that he might be king, was returned out of Persia and Media, and the king's host also that went with him, and that he sought to take unto him the ruling of the affairs. Wherefore he went in all haste, and said to the king and the captains of the host and the company, We decay daily, and our victuals are but small, and the place we lay siege unto is strong, and the affairs of the kingdom lie upon us. Now, therefore, let us be friends with these men, and make peace with them, and with all their nation, and covenant with them that they shall live after their laws, as they did before. For they are therefore displeased, and have done all these things, because we abolished their laws. So the king and the princes were content. Wherefore he sent unto them to make peace, and they accepted thereof. Also the king and the princes made an oath unto them, whereupon they went out of the stronghold. Then the king entered into Mount Sion, but when he saw the strength of the place, he broke his oath that he had made, and gave commandment to pull down the wall round about. Afterward departed he in all haste, and returned unto Antioch, where he found Philip to be master of the city. So he fought against him, and took the city by force. Chapter 7. In the 151st year, Demetrius, the son of Seleucus, departed from Rome, and came up with a few men unto a city of the seacoast, and reigned there. And as he entered into the palace of his ancestors, so it was that his forces had taken Antiochus and Lysias to bring them unto him. Wherefore when he knew it, he said, Let me not see their faces. So his host slew them. Now when Demetrius was set upon the throne of his kingdom, there came unto him all the wicked and ungodly men of Israel, having Alchemus, who was desirous to be high priest, for their captain. And they accused the people to the king, saying, Judas and his brethren have slain all thy friends, and driven us out of our own land. Now therefore
רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום יד ימינך, יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to the afternoon World Alliance of Qara'im study. And we are studying this week's Parsha. It's Parsha Vayeishev, Genesis 37:1 through 40:23, basically chapters 37, 38, 39, and 40. And I think what I'll do is it really helps me a lot and helps those that are listening, I hope, to go through it first just completely in Hebrew and just read it without any commentary. I did that at the beginning of this morning's, and I'll do it again now. It's almost like a substitute for Torah reading in the synagogue. Let's get through the whole Parsha and understand it, the storyline as it develops before we go back and we start concentrating on specific on specific portions in the parasha. So let's do that. Let me share the screen a little bit differently here. Whoa, and there we go. Is there any way to make it not do this weird effect? I guess not. I guess I just have to put this up, and then I forget to put it back afterwards. Okay. Alrighty. So let's do this. I'm going to go back to this page here. And I can close this out. We can bring up Bible Hub. And there we go. Hope everyone can see that. Looks like you can. Okay, so we are in Genesis chapter 37. And we're at the beginning of the story of Yosef. And as we mentioned last time, the baton is now being passed at the beginning of chapter 37 to the next generation, specifically to the generation of Yosef. Now, from now on, basically until the end of Genesis, Yosef becomes the focus of the story. So this is the fourth generation: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now Yosef. So Yosef, at this point, Yitzhak had just died at the end of chapter 35. And Yosef, I'm sorry, not Yosef, Jacob at this point was in Hebron, was in Kiryat Arba. He had finally returned after 20 plus years, more because there are a number of incidents that happened until then. He had returned to his father, Yitzhak. Excuse me for 1 second. Heat a little bit. All right, he returned to his father's house, to Yitzhak's house. Excuse me for 1 second. One technical issue. Sorry about that. Excuse me. So he returns to his father's house in Hebron, to Yitzhak. Remember, he'd gone to Haran. That's where he met his wives, married his wives, and the two concubines. Eventually, after 20 years, he left Lavan. His first stop after that, well, now he was traveling back to the land of Israel. His first stop, that's mentioned in the Torah, was at Gil'ad, where he made a covenant with Lavan, who would come chasing after him over a heap of stones and a pillar. That's why it's called Gal'ed. From there, he went to Peniel. Peniel is the name of the place. I think it's also mentioned as Peniel a number of times, where he saw the face of God. He wrestled with the angel in Peniel, just on the other side, on the eastern side of the Jabbok River. The Jabbok River is a river that runs into the Dead Sea from the east to the west, about halfway between the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, and the Dead Sea. We spoke about it last week. From Peniel, he went on to, I believe I'm not skipping any places. Then he ran into Esav. So from there, Esav and him, he basically ditched Esav and went to a place called Sukkah, where it says he built, where he built sukkot, he built huts for his animals. And from there, if I'm not skipping anything, this is all from memory, he went to Shechem. In Shechem, we had the whole incident with Dinah being raped, or at least being slept with by Shem, the son of Hamor. Hamor means a donkey in Hebrew, so I don't know if that's coincidence. So there he is in Shem. After that incident, he's afraid of revenge by the local inhabitants, and is probably already thinking of, getting the heck out of there, getting out of Dodge. God comes to him and tells him to go to Beth El. So he now goes to Beth El. Beth El is of great significance in Yaakov's life because that was the first place he stopped. In fact, the text of the Torah even implies the first night after he left his father's house, he stopped at Beth El, and that's where he had the dream. And then he took an oath to Yehovah, and built a standing stone, a pillar of stone there as a sign of the covenant between himself and Yehovah. So there he is back at Beth El, where he builds an altar this time. Essentially, this is now Yaakov coming full circle. From Beth El, he continues towards. So you'll notice the journey if you follow this on the map: Haran to Pinuel to Shechem to Sukkah to Beth El. It's all heading in the direction of southwest. Haran is, they say, up in southern Turkey near the Syrian border, kind of south central Turkey near the Syrian border. And so from Beth El, which is, they say, north of Jerusalem, but as I mentioned in this morning study, I have a feeling there's hints in the Torah to say that it's actually Jerusalem itself, specifically the area of the Temple Mount. I've already mentioned this in last week's study. If you want to go back and look at it, I don't usually go by mystical hints in the Torah, but I think there's a lot of potential evidence there. So from Beth El, he makes another altar, and then he heads on back to his father. His father's in Hebron. He makes one more stop at Efrat. And Efrat is where Rachel, his beloved wife, dies while giving birth to Binyamin. So Binyamin is born in the only of Yaakov's children that are born in the land of Israel. He's born in Efrat, which today is a kind of bedroom community inhabited by a lot of English speakers, but not only English speakers, kind of a liberal Dati Leumi, or it's very mixed, but overall has a reputation of kind of being a liberal or moderate Dati Leumi / American kind of bedroom community between Jerusalem and Hebron. And from there, he goes to Hebron. He goes back to his father's house. And then immediately afterwards, doesn't say anything about the reunion between Jacob and Yitzhak. Immediately afterwards, then Yitzhak, his father, dies. Well, we don't know how long afterwards, but that's the next thing that's mentioned in the Torah. And that brings us up to here. That's the end of chapter 35. Chapter 36 is the genealogy of Esav in great detail, which is important, but not for the study right now. And then we get to Genesis 37. Now the focus switches over to Yosef. And I'm going to read the entire Parsha as I did this morning in Hebrew. If you're listening to this and you heard already this morning's reading, then I guess you could skip over this part. If you're listening to it not live on later on YouTube or on Facebook. So here we go. Vayeishev Yaakov be'aretz migurei aviv be'aretz Canaan. And this is now talking about Hebron. Ele toldot Yaakov. Yosef ben 17 shana haya roe et achiv betzon והוא נער את בני בלחה ואת בני זלפה נשי אביו ויבא יוסף את דיבתה רעה אל אביהם. Verse 3, וישראל אהב את יוסף מכל בניו כי בן זקונים הוא לא ועשה לו כתונת פסים. We did a long study this morning on כתונת פסים. It does not mean a multicolored, or it probably does not mean a multicolored tunic or a technicolor robe or a robe of many colors or a striped robe. It may mean striped robe from the Aramaic we saw based on the interpretation of the Ibn Ezra, but there's nothing. The word pasim only shows up with ketonet, and shows up only here and in the second book of Samuel, Shmuel Beit. It just reminded me of a funny story when I used to go when I lived in Jerusalem, and I was in yeshiva. We'd go over to some lady's house. This particular lady, she was an interesting lady. I was going to say nice, but she wasn't really nice. But I liked her anyway. She was had a rough kind of Israeli personality, and there were two people named Shmuel who would always be there at the table, and she Shmuel in English is Samuel, so but in Hebrew Shmuel, she would always call them. They were regular guests at her Shabbat table. One of them was my roommate, and then another one I think was from the yeshiva. And she would always call them Shmuel Aleph and Shmuel Bet, First Samuel and Second Samuel. Anyway, I don't know why I thought of that. So we saw in Second Samuel that Tamar, who was raped by Amnon, David's children, had a ketonet pasim, which there is translated as a glorious robe, or I forgot the word they used in English, but it had nothing to, the translation there had nothing to do with stripes or colors or anything like that. So we spoke about that this morning, and I'm not going to go over it now. I'm just mentioning it. Vayiru ehav ki oto ahav avihem mikol ehav o yisneu oto velo yachlu dabro leshalom. ויחלום יוסף חלום, ויגיע לאחיו, ויוסיפו עוד שנוא אותו. ויאמר עליהם, שמעו נא החלום הזה אשר חלמתי, והנה אנחנו מעלמים עלומים בתוך השדה, והנה קמה אלומתי גם ניצבה, והנה תסובנה אלומתכם, ותשתחוונה לאלומתי. Excuse me, I just have to close the window here. It's sun right in my eyes. Better. Verse 8, יאמרו לו אחיו, המלוך תמלוך עלינו, אם משול תמשול בנו, ויוסיפו עוד שנוא אותו, על חלומותיו ועל דבריו. Verse 9, ויחלום עוד חלום אחר, ויספר אותו לאחיו, ויאמר, הנה חלמתי חלום עוד, והנה השמש והירח ו11 כוכבים משתחווים לי. Verse 10, ויספר אל אביו ואל אחיו ויגער בו אביו ויאמר לו, מה החלום הזה אשר חלמת? הבוא נבוא אני ועמך ואחיך להשתחוות לך ארצה. ויקנאו בו אחיו ואביו, שמר את הדבר. וילכו אחיו לרעות את צאן אביהם בשכם. ויאמר ישראל אל יוסף, הלא אחיך רועים בשכם, לך ואשלחך עליהם. ויאמר לו, הנני. ויאמר לו, לך נא ראה את שלום אחיך ואת שלום הצאן, והשיבני דבר, וישלחהו מעמק חברון ויבוא שכמה. Again, here Yaakov is in Hebron, Ma'emek Hebron. וימצאהו איש והנה טועה בשדה. וישאלהו האיש לאמור, מה תבקש? ויאמר, את אחי אנוכי מבקש. הגידה נא לי איפה הם הרועים. ויאמר האיש, נעשו מזה כי שמעתי אומרים נלכה דותיאנה. וילך יוסף אחר אחיו וימצאם בדותן. ויראו אותו מרחוק, ובטרם יקרב עליהם ויתנכלו אותו להמיתו. ויאמרו איש אל אחיו, הנה בעל החלומות הזה בא. Verse 20, עתה לכו נהרגהו ונשלחהו באחד הבורות, ואמרנו חיה רעה על חטאו. ונראה מה יהיה חלומותיו. וישמע ראובן ויצילהו מידם. Very interesting here. יצילהו This is a classic case. I'm just going to stop here for 1 second. Vayishma Reuven v'yatzileu mi'adam yomer lo nakenu nafesh. And Reuven heard, and if I were to translate this literally using kind of modern Hebrew rules, I would translate this as and did Wayatzilehu, and did save him from their hands. Yomer lo nakenu nafesh, and he said, we will not slay his soul, basically. We will not kill him. But we know, okay. We know here, okay? So there's a vav here. This vav we could interpret as changing. We know there's something called the conversive vav, I believe it's called in English. I always forget the specific name in English. In Hebrew, it's called the vav hahipuch. It basically changes past tense to future tense, or future tense to past tense, or more correctly, we should say it changes the imperfect to the perfect and the perfect to the imperfect. At any rate, we'll say past to future and future to past. And we could easily say that this is now saying Vayishma Reuven, and Reuven heard, because here it is changing it from the future to the past. Reuven heard, Vayatzilehu mi'adam, and he saved them from their hand. Okay? Yomer lo nakenu nefesh, and because he said, I will not kill his soul. Okay? So we could also say, we can also translate this as, and he saved him from his hand. But what's the problem here? This has not happened yet. Okay? Right? He didn't save them. In fact, we know Yosef was not saved. So therefore, this vav here cannot be a vav hipuch. It cannot be a conversive vav. It cannot be changing the future into the past, or the imperfect into the perfect. I'll just, for simplicity's sake, say the future into the past, because we know that's incorrect. So this vav must be an and the yatzilehu, Vayishma Reuven, and if I were to now read it as a future tense verb, I would read it as, and Reuven heard, this is in the past, Yatzilehu, and saved him from, and he will save them from his hand. Well, that doesn't make any sense. He will save them from his hand, right? What does that mean? Reuven heard, and he will save them from his hand. Well, that's something that is going to happen in the future, but this hasn't even happened yet. So we see here, this is a classic example of how the future, or how the imperfect in Hebrew works. It doesn't always mean the future per se. It can express not only what will happen in the future, but what someone hopes will happen in the future, what someone wishes will happen in the future, what someone intends will happen in the future. I believe the correct term for that is the jusive. Wikipedia for that. Okay, I must be spelling it. Juice mood home. No, I'm spelling it wrong. No, I don't mean juice mood. I think I have an I there. There we go. So let's just read about the juice of mood for a second. So the juice of mood, it's a little bit larger, is a grammatical mood of verbs for issuing orders, commanding, or exhorting within a subjunctive framework. And the key here is subjunctive. English verbs are not marked for this mood. The mood is similar to the cohortative mood. Actually, maybe what we're looking for specifically is cohortative. Well, we'll go with Joseph for now. Which typically implies to the first person by appeal to the object's duties and obligations, and the imperative, which applies to the second by command. The Joseph, however, typically covers the first and third persons. In this case, it's the first person, as we see here, right? It's the third person. Yatzilehu. It can also apply to orders by their author's wish. In the mandative subjunctive, as in English, the bank insists that she repay her debt. Okay, we can skip German, Latin, Let's go down to Hebrew. It doesn't have it for Hebrew. I thought it did have it for Hebrew. Okay. Well, let's go to Arabic. Close enough. Classical and standard Arabic verbs conjugate for at least 3 distinct moods in the imperfect, indicative, subjunctive, and jussive. In the dialects, the jussive is used after the preposition li to express a command in third person. Okay, and this is li fa'alhu, li fa'alhu. I'm reading from the Arabic. Let him do it. So so that would imply not that he will do it, but that he should do it. Okay, I might technically, this might not be the jussive. There are a number of different forms that the future can take, but I'm going to explain the idea that I'm trying to say here. So where were we? Yeah. So we shma Reuven, and Reuven heard v'yatzilehu miyadam. So the correct translation here would not be "and he will save him from his hand," as it would be if we translate it simply, but he desired to, or he wished to, or he intended to save him from his hand. This goes to show that the future, or the imperfect, again, for simplification reasons, I'm going to say the future, in Hebrew expresses more than what will happen. It expresses also what someone wants to happen, or someone intends will happen, someone desires will happen. It's a form of, as the article said, the subjunctive. The subjunctive is, for those who know Romance languages such as Spanish and Portuguese, the subjunctive, it's not called a tense, it's called a mood. It's kind of a something that happens, I guess you could say, dependent on something else, or something that someone wants or wills to happen. So the subjunctive in English would be, I want that he go home. Okay. So in English, the subjunctive is, we don't say, a lot of people say, I want that he goes home, but that's incorrect. It really should be, I want that he go home, because that he go home is a subjunctive clause, and go is the subjunctive mood of the verb to go. So I'm expressing a wish that someone else do something. Doesn't mean it will happen. I'm expressing hope or wish that this person will go home. That's the subjunctive mood. And it's the same idea here. This is a form of subjunctive where Reuven is expressing the wish or the desire or the intention to save Yosef. So I'm going to translate it again. I'll translate it literally as one who only understands Hebrew as in past and future and present. Vayeishma Reuven heard, Vayatzilehu miyadam, and he will save him from his hand. V'yomer lo nakenu nafesh, and he said, I will not slay his soul. Literally, I will not kill him by soul. I guess you can translate that. I will not slay his soul. I don't want to get sidetracked onto that. Okay. Well, that doesn't make any sense. So the correct way to translate this is Reuven heard and desired or intended or decided to intended to save him from their hand. And he said, I will not kill him. I will not kill him. I will not slay his soul. Okay. Hope that kind of makes sense. Alrighty. So off we go. Verse 22, Yomer alehem Reuven, Am tishbahu dam, ashlichoto el habor hazeh, asher bamidbar v'yad al tishlahu bo lim'an hatzil oto miyadam lahashivo el aviv. And again, we have the same thing. Lim'an hatzil. So hatzil is lim'an. This is basically an infinitive that becomes a it becomes like a noun in order of the saving of him, miyadam. Okay, and again, it's another kind of way to express this intention or the subjunctive mood. Okay, in order that he should save him from the hand, lahashivo el aviv, to return him to his father. Verse 23. Vahi kasher ba Yosef el ehaw, wa yafshithu et Yosef et ketunato, et ketunat hapasim asher alav. So what they do? They took off that beautiful coat, right? They stripped him of that beautiful coat. That was a symbol to them of jealousy and hatred towards him, that he was the favorite son of Yaakov. Verse 24, Yikahu v'yashlichu oto habora v'habor rik in bomayim. Verse 25, Vayishvu le'echol lechem v'yisu einehem v'yir'u v'hine orachat Ishmaelim ba'a migilad. Gilad, that's the same place where Lavan and Yaakov made their covenant. Not that I think it matters here, just pointing that out. U'gemalehem nosim nichot. I'm sorry, nichot. Watsri walot holchim lehorid Misraima. Verse 26. Vayomer Yehuda el Echau ma betza ki naharog et ahinu wa'achisinu et damo. Lechu ונמכרנו לישמעאלים וידנו אל תהי בו כי אחינו בשרנו הוא וישמעו אחיו. Verse 28. ויעברו אנשים מדיינים סוחרים וימשכו ויעלו את יוסף מן הבור וימכרו את יוסף לישמעאלים ב-20 כסף ויביאו את יוסף מצרימה. וישב ראובן אל הבור, והנה אין יוסף בבור, ויקרע את בגדיו. וישב אל אחיו, ויאמר הילד איננו, ואני אני בא. ויקחו את כתונת יוסף, וישחטו שעיר עזים, ויטבלו את כתונת בדם, וישלחו את כתונת הפסים, ויביאו אל אביהם. יאמרו זאת מצאנו, הכר נא הכתונת בנך היא אם לא. ויקירה ויאמר כתונת בני חיה רעה אכלתהו טרוף טורף יוסף. ויקרא יעקב שמלותיו וישם שק במותניו ויטבל על בנו ימים רבים. יקומו כל בניו וכל בנותיו ולנחמו. Interesting here, it says all of his sons and all of his daughters וכל בנותיו. Okay, and the only daughter that's mentioned at this by name beforehand is Dinah. Okay, two explanations here. Perhaps you can say that well, either way, it doesn't matter. But so okay. Binotav could mean not only direct children, but or daughters, but also granddaughters, great-granddaughters, etc., etc. No children of Yaakov's children are mentioned yet, at least not by name. So, but either way, it's interesting that whether it's daughters or granddaughters, when the count is given on how on the exact number of people that went down to Egypt as 70, and if you add it up including Yaakov, it does come out to 70. The only girl mentioned in that entire list, unless I'm forgetting one, there may be a wife mentioned, I can't remember, I don't think so. The only girl mentioned at least by name in that entire list, to the best of my memory, at least the only daughter of Yaakov mentioned by name is Dinah. And whether these Binotav, all of his sons and all of his daughters, whether this includes, whether this means his direct daughters or his granddaughters, either way, we see here that, at least according to this word, and there's no reason to have it in the plural unless the word plural, amount of daughters, that he had multiple daughters. But the only one of any importance in the story is Dinah. So the other daughters, the point that I'm trying to make is the other daughters are never mentioned by name, and they're not even counted in the number of people that went down to Egypt. It's just very strange, but it does show that daughters, that women are basically, I don't want to use the word irrelevant because that will be misunderstood, but are behind the scenes or behind the veil, shall we speak, unless there's a reason to bring them forward in front of the veil and name them by name. And in the case of Genesis, the only one of Yaakov's descendants who is a female that is named by name is Dinah, because of the story that happened between her and Shem, the son of Hamor. Okay, hope that kind of makes sense. Alrighty, so let's go on. ויקומו כל בניו וכל בנותיו לנחמו וימאן להתנחם ויאמר כי ארד אל בני עוול שאולה ויבך אותו אביו. Verse 36, והמדיינים מכרו אותו אל מצרים לפוטיפר סריס פרעה שר הטבחים. Verse 1, ויהי בעת ההיא. Let's explore that a little bit, because we have two groups here. We have the Yishmaelim and we have the Midianim. So oops. Oops, my mistake. So for something else here. One second. Right. I just wanted to be thorough here. Midian, Midian, Midian. Midian. Just give me 1 second here. Right. So if we go to Genesis 25:2, and I'll just do it in the English just to make it go a little bit more quickly. In this case, how do we do this? NIV. Okay, so here we have the lineage of Ishmael. Here we have the lineage of Abraham and Keturah. So after Sarah dies, Abraham takes another wife named Keturah, and she bears him Zimran, Yokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Then here we have the sons of Midian. And then we have Ishmael's sons. So let me just explain the problem that I'm looking at here. Okay, so the word Midianim and Yishmaelim seem to be used interchangeably here. So we go back to Genesis 37. Let's read the story again. Okay, so let's go back here a little bit. So the brothers sit down to eat after they throw Yosef into the empty well. And they sit down to eat, and they see a caravan of Yishmaelim, of Ishmaelites. And then Yehuda says, let's sell him to the Ishmaelim, since he's our brother. And then it says, V'yavru anashim midyanim socharim. And then Midyanim came. So who's Midyan? We just saw Midyan is the son of Abraham and Keturah. So Midyanim came and they pulled him out of the well, and they sold him to the Ishmaelim. Okay, so everything so far is so good. So Yehuda doesn't get a chance to go grab him and sell him to the Ishmaelim, because Midyanim come and they sell him first to the Ishmaelim for 20 talents of silver. Then Reuven comes back. Remember, he had desired to save Yosef. We saw that above. Then he sees that Yosef's not there. And then they do this whole thing. So at this point, according to what we're seeing here, Midianim took him and sold him to Yishmaelim. Okay, I guess the Midianim had seen the Yishmaelim coming as well, and they took him first before Yehuda can get them, and they sold him to the Yishmaelim. But then it says, so everything makes sense so far. But then it says in verse 36, the Midyanim, Machruoto el Mitzrim, the Midyanim sold him to Egypt, to Potiphar, the eunuch assistant. Obviously wasn't a eunuch because he had a wife. The assistant of Paro, the head of the slaughterhouse, or however you want to translate this. Irrelevant. So how did the Midyanim get him? It really should be, at this point, he should be in the hands of the Ishmaelim, because the Midyanim sold him to the Ishmaelim, it says above, and the Ishmaelim were the ones who were going down to Egypt. So how do we get all of a sudden that the Midyanim sold him to Egypt? Well, a couple of explanations that I can come up with. Number one, we could say Midian and Ishmael are interchangeable, that the Midyanim were actually Ishmaelim and Ishmaelim were actually Midyanim, but I don't think that explanation makes sense. Remember, Midian was a son of Keturah and Abraham. Ishmael was a son of Hagar and Abraham. So I guess we could say, well, by extension, the Midyanim and the Ishmaelim are the same, but it doesn't make any sense to me. The second thing we could say is when it says Hamidyamin Machruot el Mitzrayim lePotifar Saris Paro Sarat Tabachnim, I think this explanation now makes a lot more sense. Well, it was the Midyanim who sold him to the Ishmaelim, and the Ishmaelim who took him down to Egypt and sold him to Potiphar. So by extension, it was the Midyanim who sold him to Egypt, to Potiphar. And this is kind of a summary sentence, because now we go on to something else afterwards. We go to Yehud and Tamar, and summary sentences kind of so it's summing up the whole story, and those summary sentences don't usually go into such detail. They kind of, as any summary sentence, even in our language, we do sum everything up. So it would make sense that as a summary sentence, it would say that the Midyanim sold him to Egypt and to Potiphar, where really it's just kind of a summary sentence for saying the whole story, which is the Midyanim grabbed him from the well, sold him to Yishmaelim, and the Yishmaelim in turn sold him to the Mitzrim, to Egypt. Well, just for fun and games, let's check out Rashi, and let's then check out Robert Alter. Those are two sources I like to always consult. One, because it's usually a ridiculously bizarre and stupid, if I may use that word, explanation. That's Rashi. And then Robert Alter, because it's usually a very good explanation. Let's do the Robert Alter first. Excuse me for 1 second, I can get it. So let's see if Robert Alter picks up on this and what he has to say. I have not read the Robert Alter on this. Robert Alter, again, is a kind of a modern professor slash Hebrew slash biblical scholar who's written a translation and commentary on at this point, the entire Tanakh. And I don't know what he's going to say, but often I agree with him. Often he agrees with me, shall I say. And that's kind of a good feeling because I have a lot of respect for him. So let's see what he says here. This is Genesis, close this out. This is Genesis 37. If he even comments on it at all, I don't know. So this is Genesis 37:36. See here. So where are we? That's 37. That's 38. So 37:36. 36. I don't think he mentions it at all, as a matter of fact. No, he doesn't mention that at all. Why it says here Midianim when it really should say Yishmaelim? Well, let's see if he mentions it earlier anywhere. One second. Ishmaelites. This is a generic term, so he says regarding verse 25. In verse 25, it says that Yehuda and the brothers looked up. I guess minus Reuven, because Reuven didn't know what was going on afterwards, but and saw the Yishmaelim coming. And so Robert Alter says there, Yishmaelites is a generic term for the semi-nomadic traders of Arab stock whose homeland was east of the Jordan, but is also an anachronism since at the time of the story, the eponymous Ishmael, the great uncle of the 12 fathers, of the 12 brothers, was still alive, though he would be near the end of his 127-year lifespan, and the only Ishmaelites would be their second cousins. Right. Okay, so what he's saying is that this is an anachronism here, that they're using the word Yishmaelim, which later on, when the Torah was written or codified, whatever he's saying here, and I'm not sure exactly what time period he's talking about, that Yishmaelim basically meant nomadic traders, nomadic Arab traders. Okay, well, obviously I don't agree with that. Let's see if there's anything else he says. Verse 28, he mentions regarding the Midianite merchants. So in verse 28, it says, V'yavru anashim Midianim socharim. So Midianite merchants passed by, and they pulled Yosef out of the dry well, out of the well. This is the one signal moment when the two literary strands out of which the story is woven seem awkwardly spliced. Up to this point, no Midianites have been mentioned. So he's now relating to the documentary hypothesis. Unfortunately, this is he's a secular. He's Jewish, but he's secular, so he believes in the documentary hypothesis, which obviously I don't believe in it at all. I think it's ridiculous. But let's read it anyway, because maybe we'll get some information out of it. This is the one signal moment when the two literary strands out of which the story is woven seem awkwardly spliced. Up to this point, no Midianites have been mentioned. Elsewhere, Midianites and Ishmaelites appear to be terms from different periods, designating the same people. Compare Judges 8:22 and 8:24. Maybe we'll do that. So the selling of Joseph to the Ishmaelites looks like a strained attempt to blend two versions that respectively use two different terms. And the Midianite intervention contradicts the just stated intention of the brothers to pull Joseph out of the pit themselves and sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites for profit. Reuven came back to the pit, verse 29. So Reuven came back, saw that Joseph wasn't there. The contradiction between the two versions continues, since one is driven to assume that Reuven was not present at the fraternal meal during which the selling of Joseph was discussed, though there is no textual indication of that his absence, right? And I kind of alluded to that. Let me just look ahead a little bit. Okay, so basically, Robert Alter is saying that there are two different literary traditions. According to the documentary hypothesis, the Torah has 4 different authors that were then strung together. The J, the E, the P, and the D. The Jehovah, the Elohists, the priestly, and the Deuteronomy strands, which were then all pieced together to make the final Torah. Obviously, I don't believe that at all. However, so we can disregard that. But what he is doing, what is interesting here is, and basically, you have to read between the lines, but basically by Robert Alter's admission or statement that it comes from different sources, different strands, he's basically saying he doesn't know really why it says Ishmaelim and Midyanim, why they seem to be used in an intertwined kind of manner, almost an interchangeable manner. And the other reason he gives is it's an anachronism, that Midyanim and Ishmaelim mean basically the same thing later on, that they mean kind of Arab nomads from the east. So the only thing that I can say I agree with, or I can't say that Robert Alter kind of backs up what I'm saying, not in the sense that you might think, but in the sense that by his statement of saying it comes from different strands, it's clear that he and other commentators see a problem here between this back and forth between the Ishmaelim and the Midyanim, and that it doesn't make sense. It doesn't seem to make sense. So he does point us to Judges 8:22 and 8:24. So let's go take a look at that. So Judges 8:22. And let's see what we got. So the story of Gidon, verse 22. Amru ish Yisrael el Gidon, Mishal banu gam ata, gam mincha, gam ben binecha, ki hoshatanu miyad Midian. So they said to, I'll just translate it, the story of Gidon. We know one of the judges, one of the leaders of Israel that saved Israel from Midian, in fact. So verse 22, Judges 8:22. And the men of Israel said to Gidon, do you also intend, Mashal banu gam ata? Do you also intend to rule over us? Gam bincha v'gam ben binecha? Also your sons and your sons' sons? Ki oshatanu miyad Midian, just because you saved us out of the hand of Midian? Yomer alehem Gidon, and Gidon said to them, Lo imshal ani bachem, v'lo yimshal beni bachem, Yoah yimshal bachem. And Gidon said, I will not rule over you, and my sons or my son will not rule over you. Yehovah will rule over you. Verse 24, Yomer alehem Gidon, Eshala mikem she'ela. Let me ask you a question. So yes, Gidon asked the Israelite men a question. Tnuli ish nezem shelalo ki nizme zahav lehem yishmaelim hem and he said to them, and Gidon said to them, let me ask you a question, and each person should give me his nose ring as, how do you say shalal in English again? Booty. What's the word? Plunder. Kinizmei zahav lahem. Because they had nose rings of gold, because they were Yishmaelim. Now I'm confused. Let me go to the English for a second, just to save time. And we'll go back a little bit. One second here. One second. By the way, a lot of places we mentioned are mentioned in Peniel, Sukkot. Gidon went up by the route of the nomads. Let's get that in Hebrew. So here they just say Shchonei Ba'alim. So they don't use the word Ishmaelim or anything like that. They just say those who dwell in tents. So forget that. Just reading here in the English to myself, trying to find evidence of what's going on here. So the Israelites said to Gidon, rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian. But Gidon told them, I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. And he said, I do have one request, that each of you give me an earring for your share, from your share of the plunder. So now Gidon is just asking. So Gidon has saved Israel from the Midianites. Okay, I think I got it now. It was the custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings. So this is interesting. So here, okay, put it over there, and I can't deal with it now. Okay, so over there. All right. So now I got it in context. It was the custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings. So it seems that the Ishmaelites and the Midianites are again being used interchangeably here. Right? So Gidon is saying, no, I don't want to rule over you. I want some booty. I want some of the shalal. Please just give me an earring from the plunder. And then it says it was the custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings. But okay, now I understand the point that Robert Alter is making. What he's saying is that, again, Ishmaelites and Midianites are being used interchangeably. Okay. So, because here Gidon had vanquished not the Ishmaelites, he had vanquished the Midianites. And yet, he asks, after he vanquished the Midianites for Israel, he asks for the earrings. And then it doesn't say here, it should say it was the custom of the Midianites to wear gold earrings. That would make sense. And that way, Gidon could ask of the men of Israel to give him the earrings that he gotten from the Midianites. But it doesn't say here Midianites, it says here Yishmaelites. So what Robert Alter is saying is that this is another proof verse or verses saying that basically Ishmaelites and the Midianites are used interchangeably, and that therefore this is an anachronism. And you know what? That actually kind of might make sense, to be honest. Let me just see one thing. One second. So that's again irrelevant where it says no man's up above. Okay, now I get now Robert Alter's comment makes a lot more sense. Let's now switch back over to Hebrew, and maybe I'll try to explain it one more time for myself, for as much as for those listening. But first, I'm going to have to take a little break. So let's do that. Take about a 5-minute break, and then I will come back and explain this.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל יתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם זה שמיים הארץ, אל יתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל, עד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם על יד ימינך יומם השמש לא יככה ריח הלילה השם ישמור לך מכל רע ישמור את נפשך השם יצאך ובואך ואתה ועד עולם אוי אוי מקימי מעפר דל מהשפות ירים מאוד אוי להושיבי עם נדיבים עם נדיבי עמו תגנאי נאי נאי השם אלוקינו המקביל לשבת אוי בשמיים ובארץ אוי מקימי מעפר דל מהשפות ירים אביון אוי להושיבי עם נדיבי עמו אוי מגיני מעפר דל מהשפות ירים אביון אוי להושיבי עם נדיבים עם נדיבי עמו אוי להושיבי עם נדיבים עם נדיבי עמו עם נדיבי עמו
Okay, we're back. So we were talking about the Ishmaelites versus the Midianites. We had mentioned a commentary by Robert Alter that says, well, there's an inconsistency here. I'm not going to go over it again, but we were in Judges 8, and we were looking at Judges 8, chapter 8, verse 22. Let me switch over to the Hebrew here. And this is Gidon, who has just vanquished the Midianites. And it says here, "V'yomru ish Israel el Gidon." So the men of Israel came to Gidon, or they said to Gidon, "Mishal banu, gam ata, gam bincha, gam ben benecha, ki osh'atanu miyad Midian." So basically, they come to him and they ask him to rule over. Israel asks Gidon to rule over him as a dynasty, you and your son and your son's sons, because you've saved us, you've redeemed us or saved us from the hand of Midian. Verse 23, Wayomer alehem Gidon. And Gidon said to them, Lo yimshal ani bachem, I will not rule over you. Velo yimshal bnei bachem, and my son will not rule over you. Yehovah yimshol bachem, but God, Yehovah, will rule over you. Verse 24, Wayomer alehem Gidon. Wayomer alehem Gidon, and Gidon said to them, Eshala mikem she'ela, tni li ish nezem shalalo, ki nizme zahav lehem ki Ishmaelim hem. So, well, the English translation, okay. V'yomer alehem Gidon. Gidon said to them, I will request from you one request, or a request. Utnu li ish nezem shalalo, that each person should give me the nose ring, or the ring that he gained as spoils of the battle against the Midianites. Ki nizme zahav lehem ki Ishmaelim hem. And literally it says, because they had gold rings, because they were Ishmaelites. Well, because they were Ishmaelites, that obviously couldn't be referring to Israel, right? It must be referring to the Midianites. So it's calling the Midianites Ishmaelites. So here we have again kind of an interplay, or an alternative use or parallel use between the Ishmaelim and the Midianim. And that's what Robert Alter is picking up on when he says that when we now go back to, right, it should say here, ki Midianim hem. They had gold rings because they were Midianites, right? But Yishmaelim, so Robert Alter says that Yishmaelim and Midianim just mean nomadic traders, or nomadic traders from the east, that they're used interchangeably. Because at the time when the Torah was written down, not sure exactly what time he's referring to, but at a later time when this was written down, that at a later time when this was written down, that the traders to the east were called both Yishmaelim and Midianim. Okay, and the two words were used interchangeably. Okay. So this now brings us back to Genesis 37, where we have this sentence over here. So everything makes sense up until now. Okay. So the other explanation that Robert Alter gives is he says that it's coming from different traditions, right? The documentary hypothesis I mentioned before, that one of the traditions is saying the Midianim and the other is saying the Yishmaelim, and he also points out an inconsistency, that it seems that Ruvain did not sit down and eat lunch or eat with the rest of the brothers. So he's saying there seem to be two strands here. Well, I completely reject the documentary hypothesis, so I'm not even going to go in that direction. But what I will say is that his second point, that Midianim and Yishmaelim are being used interchangeably. Excuse me for 1 second. Sorry about that. So so the other explanation that Robert Alter is saying is that really the word Yishmaelim and Midyanim are used interchangeably, and they're both later phrases that mean merchants or nomadic merchants from the east. Okay, I can maybe accept this. The other explanation that I gave is, well, everything makes sense. Everything is consistent up until until verse 36. So we have here, the story is that the brothers notice that there's a caravan of Ishmaelim coming, and Yehuda intends to go back and take Yosef out and sell him to the Ishmaelim. But then it says that Midianites came instead of Yehuda. Midianites came and pulled Yosef out of the well and sold him to the Ishmaelim. And then the Ishmaelim brought him down. Then the Ishmaelim brought him down to Egypt. One second here. Okay. No, that the Midianites sold him to the Ishmaelim for 20 talents of kesef. And then, so the Midianites sold him to the Ishmaelim, but here in verse 36, it says that, wait one second here. Right. But here it says the Midianites sold him to Egypt, to Potiphar Saris Paro. So my explanation is that this is a summary sentence, as I mentioned before, of the chapter. And therefore, when it says that the Midianim sold him to Potiphar in Egypt, that really, what it really means is the Midianim sold him to the Ishmaelites, and the Ishmaelites sold him to Potiphar. But since it's a summary sentence, it's just saying it in short, that basically it's the Midianites who picked him up, and in the end he ended up being sold to Potiphar. So that's my explanation. I think it's better than Robert Alter's explanation, to be quite frank. But I do want to understand Robert Alter's explanation, which he says that based on Judges 8:22 through 24, that Yishmaelim and Midianim are used interchangeably, and that later on they both meant merchants or wandering merchants, nomadic merchants to the east. And therefore, when it says Midianim here, there's no contradiction to the fact that it seems like it was the Ishmaelim who had hold of him at the point that he was brought down to Egypt. Okay, that's a possible explanation because, as we know, let me find the exact verse. So from Dan to Beersheba is the example that's often given. One second. No, this is not the phrase I'm looking for. I don't remember what it is now. At any rate, the point is that there are anachronisms used in the Torah that seem to be looking ahead to the time the Torah was written down rather than the time that the events took place. So I don't accept Robert Alter's first explanation that we're talking about different strands from the documentary hypothesis. It's possible that what he's saying here is that Midianim and Yishmaelim are used interchangeably, just as they seem to be in Judges 8:22 and 24. Or the other explanation here is that the Midianim, that this is a summary sentence, so it really is just summing up the fact that the Midianim pulled him out, sold him to the Ishmaelites, and then the Ishmaelites sold him to Egypt. But then we'd have to go back to Judges 8:22 and 24 and explain why it says here Ishmaelim rather than Midianim. For that, I don't really have much of an explanation, except to say the only thing that's consistent with these two things would be Robert Alter's second explanation, that Yishmaelim and Midianim are used interchangeably later on to represent merchants to the east, and that my explanation that this is a summary sentence is wrong. So that would actually probably be the most logical conclusion, but it obviously requires a lot more study, and I'm not going to do it all right now. But I did want to look into that a little bit. Let me just see one thing here. Zahav lehem ki shmelim hem. Right? Unless Yishmaelim in general just means, let's see what comes up here. It's going to come up as Ishmaelites, obviously. Just out of curiosity, let's check out Rashi. Not that anything he says I believe. He usually says complete nonsense, but let's just check it out for fun. So, we've got to go to Sefaria. So we're in Genesis 37:36. Rashi. Genesis 37:36. Okay. That's 38. Here, 38:1. Oh, geez. I'm all the way back here. Hold on a second. Let's try this again. Tanakh. Rashi. Genesis 37. Thirty-seven, 36. Oh, there it is. So it doesn't really say anything about it at all, right? Let's go back up a little bit. Okay. So that's 35. 36 Tabachim. So he doesn't relate to that at all. He just explains the word Sara Tabachim over here. So we won't even relate to that. Okay, I don't know. It requires further investigation. It is strange. The bottom line is here in Genesis 37:36. It should say Yishmaelim, since these were the ones who, according to the story, Yehuda had intended to sell them to the Yishmaelim, but the Midyanim picked them up and sold them to the Yishmaelim instead, and then the Yishmaelim sold them to Potiphar. Okay, anyway, we're going to go on reading. So let's do that. All right, Genesis 38. Now we have the story of Yehuda and Tamar. Vayehi ba'et hahi, vayered Yehuda me'et ahav, vayet ad ish adulami u'shmo hira, vayar sham Yehuda bat ish kina'ani shmo shua, v'yikaheha v'yavo eleha, v'tahar v'teled ben v'yikra et shmo er, v'tahar od v'teled ben v'tikra et shmo onan, v'tosef od v'teled ben v'tikra et shmo shela, ha b'chaziv b'lidata oto. Chziv, there's a place, I assume it's going to be the same place. There's a place in modern Israel called Achziv, which is in the north. Of the country, right along the coast. We were there, remember? Right near Rosh Hanikra. Achziv, we went there with Eric. South of the caves, when we went to the guy that had made his own country and was stamping passports, who had died. But his wife, I think, was still running the place, right? Chaziv, no, but here they've located somewhere else, so it's not the same place. Okay. It's over here, not far from Jerusalem. Okay, different place. Anywho, so Belidata oto. Belidata oto. Verse 6, Vayikach Yehuda Isha la'er b'choro shma Tamar. Vahi er b'chor Yehuda ra b'einei Yehovah v'yamitehu Yehovah. Yomer Yehuda le'onan bo el eshet achicha ויבם אותה, והחכם זרע לאחיך. Verse 9, וידע עונן כי לא יהיה עזרה. וחיה אם בא אל אשת אחיו, ושיחת ארצה לבלתי נתן זרע לאחיו. וירא בעיני יהוה אשר עשה, וימת גם אותו. ויאמר יהודה לתמר כלתו, שבי אלמנה בית אביך, עד יתגל שלה בני, כי אמר פן ימות גם הוא כאחיו, ותלך תמר ותשב בית אביה. One second. Right. So this is an interesting verse. Yomer Yehuda leTamar. So Yehuda said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, Shvi almana beit avicha. Go back to your father's house and sit and be a widow. She had not had any children, so it's common to go back to the father's house if you don't have children. You return to being part of your father's household. There's actually a law in the Torah regarding this, of the daughter of a Kohen who marries someone who's not a Kohen and then is not allowed to eat of the holy things, the reserved things for the Kohanim. But then it divorces without children and goes back to her father's house, who is a Kohen, and once again she's allowed to eat of the holy things that she did when she was a child, because she didn't, and it says specifically a woman who did not have children. So if you didn't have children, then if you're divorced or widowed, apparently it seems you go back to your father's house and return to being part of his household as you were when you were a child. If you have your own child already, then I guess you're considered like your own household at that point. So that's what's happening here. It's backed up in that law that I just told you about. Which is in, well, we won't go there right now. So go back, be a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. That's the third son. Remember, and Onan are already dead. Ki amar pen yamut gamhu, because he said maybe he's going to also die. I'm worried that he's also going to die, lest he also die. Yachav, like his brothers. Tamar v'teshev beit avia. And so Tamar went back and sat in her father's house. So Yehuda is actually lying to Tamar, right? It seems, because he has no intention of giving her, at least not anytime soon, not anytime quickly, to his son Shelah, because in his eyes, Tamar's like the black widow. Everything she touches dies, right? Died, Onan died, and now he's worried that Shelah is going to die. So he's supposed to, according to the laws of Yibum, he's now supposed to marry Shelah, and Shelah is supposed to have children with her, with Tamar. Just as Onan was supposed to have children with Tamar, that's Yibum, that's later written into Torah law. But Yehuda wants nothing to do with this. He doesn't want this woman anywhere near Shelah, because she's got the whammy. She's got the whammy on her. She's got the touch of death on her, and he's afraid his third son and his final son is also going to die. Right? Okay, so. Verse 12, Wayirbu Yamim with Tamat Bat Shua. So that's his wife, his Adulamite wife. One second. Yeah. Bat Shua, that's his wife that he married. So now Yehuda's a widow. This is the daughter of the Canaanite, right? Now remember that these Canaanite women are bringing trouble to Yehuda, just as they brought trouble to both Abraham and to Isaac. Isaac complained about Esau marrying the Canaanite women, right? And so then he took a Ishmaelite. Interesting that it says there Ishmaelite, and we're just talking about Ishmaelites. And here Yehuda is making the same mistake. He's taking a Canaanite woman, the daughter of Shua. and Adulamite, who ostensibly would be a Canaanite. And well, let's see what an Adulami is. Adulamite. Let's Wikipedia it. Save a little time here. So, oh, okay. So that seems to be in the same place as, okay, I guess that makes sense, as Kaziv, right? It's pretty much the same place where Kaziv was. So that's Adulam. So these are Canaanites. So now Yehud is taking a Canaanite woman, and she's causing him some trouble as well, right? In a sense, although not her directly, but I guess Tamar is causing him trouble. But I guess the point is he's having trouble. Maybe the implication is he's having all this trouble because he decided to take a local Canaanite woman. Okay, at any rate, Tamat Bat Shua, that's the Adulamite woman that Yehuda had taken. So now Yehuda is a widower. Ish Yehuda, V'yinachem Yehuda, Ya'al al Gozazeit Ono Hu, Wahira Re'ehu Adulami Timnata. So now his pal Hira, who's mentioned up here, who is not part of his family, Hira knew someone else, or Yehuda met someone else named Shua, and he married Shua's daughter, but he's got his pal Hira, so they go down to Timnah, which based on the modern names at least is Timnah's near Elat, just a little bit north of Elat. We were there a couple of years ago, 2019. Wa Yugad Tamar Lemor Hine Hamicha Rolet Nata Legos Tzono. What tasar bidei al minuta מעליה תכעס בסעיף ותתעלף ותתעלף ותשב בפתח עיניים אשר על דרך תמנתה כי ראתה כי גדל שלה היא הוא והיא לא ניתנה לו לאישה. ויראה יהודה יחשביה לזונה כי כיסתה פניה. So Yehud is a widower. Tamar is a widow. Yehuda goes down to Timnah with his bud Hira, and Tamar finds out about it. It was told to Tamar, and she takes off her widower's clothes, which is interesting because it implies that there were certain clothes worn by widows. Even today in certain countries, I think that widows wear black for the rest of their lives. Is that right? Well, like in Greece and in some places, right? Yeah, all over the world. Once they become a widow, they cover their hair and they wear black, right? In some places. I think in Greece, for instance, right? In Portugal, some. So I guess it was the same thing back then. There was special clothing for widowers. So she took off these widowers' clothing. You can see it in the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding. You see the grandma, Yaya, is wearing all black always because she's a widower. So like when she goes on the roof, I think it was the roof of the Turks next door who happened to live next door, and they bring her back, and they bring her back, and then the father, her son, says something like, says, "Look who's back, yeah, and there she is wearing all her black widow's clothing, and then the Turks from next door say, "They keep your mother out of my yard, off my roof, or off of my lawn," whatever the case was. At any rate, if you watch that movie, you'll see that she is an almanah, she's a widow, and she's wearing all black. So same thing here, right? This seems to be special clothing that widows wore. So she took those off in Tachas B'Saif, and she covered herself with a veil, watit alaf, wrapped herself in it. V'tisheh b'fetach einayim, and einayim is a place. Okay, mentioned again in Joshua. Probably a place where there were springs or wells, because a spring or a well is called an ayin. So b'petach einayim, asher al derech timnata, which is on the way to Timnah, ki ra'ata ki gadal shela hi vehi lo nitna lo. So she knows that Shelah, the third son, who Yehuda is now trying to avoid giving to her, or giving her to him, so she's not been given to him. Okay, so La'isha. So it's time, she's been waiting around. Her biological clock is ticking. And Yehuda is supposed to be giving her to Shelah, according to the laws of levirate marriage, according to the laws of Yibum. And he's not giving her to Shelah, so she decides to take matters into her own hand. Why? Yire'eha Yehuda uyachshevel lezona ki kista paneha. So Yehuda sees her and thinks she's a prostitute. Uya'et aleha el haderach. Uyomer havana avo alayach ki lo yada ki kalatohi. Utomer ma titeni ki tavo elai. So they're negotiating a price. Uyomer anochi ashalach gidi izim. I will send a young goat, kid of a goat. Lo tevashel gidi v'chalev imo. I'll send the kid of a goat. Mean that's owned from the flocks. And remember, he'd gone down here. He'd gone down to Timnah to with his flocks, right? It does mention al gozezet. Oh no. Anyway, okay. So he's going to give her a goat. From the flocks. And she said to him, basically, you should give me a some kind of pledge, some kind of collateral, until you send me the goat. Verse 18, the proverbial, I guess, leaving your watch by the prostitute or something like that, or forgetting your wallet. Well, I guess the prostitute is supposed to be stealing the wallet, but you leave your watch by the prostitute, and then she brings it back to you, in front of your wife or something like that, right? Isn't that the way the movies sometimes play it? Well, pretty much the same story happens here. V'yomer maha arevon asher eten lach, v'tomer chotamcha pitilecha umatcha asher biyadecha v'yiten la v'yavo elea v'tahar lo. So he leaves, really stupidly, his signet ring, chotemet, chotam, his cord. I'm not sure what that's referring to. A patil is we know it is patil techelet, right? Like a string. I'm not sure what that really means there. Umatcha, and your staff, that we know, right? And the staff was often it might have had some kind of insignia on it, which symbolizes that it's Yehuda's. The signet for sure did, right? So maybe these are things which uniquely identify Yehuda, right? I'm not sure what the patil is in this case. I'm curious. Let's see what Robert Alter has to say. if anything. I won't even bother with Rashi this time because he's not going to say anything of use. So this is Genesis 38:17. 38:17. So first of all, he translates this verse as, "I person will send a kid from the flock," and she said, "Only if you give a pledge till you send it." And he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" And she said, "Your seal and cord, and the staff in your hand." Okay, so he translates it as seal and cord with hyphens in between seal and cord, as if it's one thing. That's interesting. Okay, let's see if he notes anything about it. A kid from the flock, your seal and cord, he does. Okay, well, let's start back in verse 17. He says, a kid from the flock, though this is plausible enough payment coming from a prosperous pastoralist in a barter culture, it also picks up the motif of the slaughtered kid whose blood was used by Judah and his brothers to deceive Jacob. Never thought of that before. As Jacob before them used a kid to deceive his father. Okay, maybe. This connection was aptly perceived a millennium and a half ago in the Midrash Bereshit Rabbah. The other material element in the brothers' deception of their father was a garment. Tamar uses a garment, the whore's dress and veil, to deceive her father-in-law. Okay, maybe. Only if you give a pledge, Tamar is not only bold and enterprising in getting for herself the justice Judah has denied her, but also very shrewd. She realizes it is crucial for her to retain evidence of the paternity of the child she may conceive. Yeah, that's true. She definitely is a like the Oprah Winfrey of her time, very entrepreneurial, I guess. Probably a lot smarter than Oprah Winfrey. Your seal and cord. So here we go. And this is what Robert Alter says about that. And the staff in your hand. Okay, the seal was a cylinder seal attached to a cord and usually worn around the neck. Rolled over documents incised in clay, it would be the means of affixing a kind of self-notarized signature. It is less clear that the staff had a legal function, though of course in political contexts it is a symbol of authority. Tamar's stipulated pledge then is an extravagant one, taking the instruments of Judah's legal identity and social standing is something like taking a person's driver's license and credit cards in modern society. I think that's actually a very good commentary. He gave them to her and he came to bed with her and she conceived by him. The rapid chain of verbs suggests the pragmatically focused nature of the transaction. Both participants, the last of the three verbs reveals that Tamar gets exactly what she's aiming for. Yeah. Okay, so the seal and the cylinder, so this is a signet ring, right? So they found a lot of these. I mean, these are found all over Israel, these signet rings from much later times, I believe. Let's see. Whoa. No. There we go. So that would be a signet ring. Biblical Joseph's ring found? Really? Blogs in the time of Israel? That sounds very suspicious. I don't believe that. Simcha Jacobovici? Huh? Well, let's read it just for the heck of it. Lately, my historical sleuthing has been focused on the biblical Joseph. Who is this guy? Canadian-Israeli filmmaker and journalist. He's a 3-time Emmy winner for outstanding investigative journalism and a New York Times best-selling author. He's also an adjunct professor in the Department of Religion at Huntington University of Ontario. Okay, well, at least he's got some credentials. Let's read. What the heck? Lately, my historical sleuthing has been focused on the biblical Joseph. He had multicolored coat fame, and we learned it's not multicolored, right? At least doesn't seem to be. I wrote a blog connecting the discovery of fragments of a monumental statue in Egypt with the Israelite patriarch Joseph. Now I'd like to set the bar higher. I think we can identify Joseph's royal ring. After more than 3,700 years, you would think that finding a tiny ring in an Egyptian archaeological context would be impossible. As it turns out, finding it was less of a problem than identifying what it is. Understood historically, we can link a specific ring discovered in the Nile Delta with Joseph himself. The story of Joseph is the longest single narrative. We know the story of Joseph. We can skip all this. Pharaoh took his ring off his own hand and placed it on Genesis 41, 41 to 42. This is much later, placed on the hand of Joseph. It's a rag to riches tale, but is it history? Moreover, can we find the ring? We know for a fact from both, well, this is not part of the story we're reading right now, but okay, let's go for it anyway. We know for a fact from both textual and archaeological evidence, a little bit larger so people following along on the screen can see, that the rulers of Egypt were indeed called pharaohs. We also know for a fact that they wore royal rings, which were their seals, meaning other members of the ruling house and its administration wore those seals when they stamped documents in the name of Pharaoh. Furthermore, we know what these seals looked like and what they had inscribed on them. Basically, they attested to the divinity of Pharaoh. They established his divinity by claiming that he was son of God, the son of this or that, blah, blah, blah. So it seems that the biblical narrative whereby the ring is placed on Joseph's finger is consistent with history and archaeology in the sense that such rulers did wear royal rings of authority. If such a ring was placed on Joseph's finger, it would have created an immediate theological problem for Joseph. After all, he was a monotheist. Okay. Put simply, wearing the ring attesting to the divinity of Pharaoh would have been a huge problem for Joseph. It would be tantamount to idolatry. Really? I think that's pushing it a bit too far. So what do you do if you're Joseph? You either quit your job or you have another ring design that is monotheistically speaking kosher. I don't think Joseph would have cared, quite frankly. It's not a reflection on him. It just happens to be Pharaoh's ring. Among the Egyptians, the purpose of the ring was to deify Pharaoh. But for Joseph, the purpose of any ring would have been to celebrate God. More than this, Pharaohs denied their earthly fathers and celebrated their heavenly fathers. In contrast, Joseph would have wanted to celebrate his earthly father, Jacob, by proclaiming Jacob's exalted status as the chosen one of God. Put simply, Egyptian pharaohs celebrated themselves as sons of God. Joseph would have celebrated himself as the son of human chosen by the one and true God. Seems like overlaying, like modern Judaism on ancient times, but all right, let's go on. Is there any tradition in the biblical or rabbinical literature treating Jacob in this chosen one of God way? In fact, there is in Genesis 49:24. It refers to God as the mighty one of Jacob. In the Babylonian Talmud, the rabbis slightly shift the emphasis when referring specifically to Joseph. There, they call Joseph's father the mighty one, Jacob. In other words, the biblical tradition refers to Jacob in near divine terms? No, and declares that he's God's chosen one. In Genesis 47:10, it is Jacob that blesses Pharaoh and not the other way around. The idea is encapsulated in a formula that is still repeated every day in the Jewish prayer service. It's a quote from Psalms 135:4. The formula is God selected Jacob as his own, Israel as his treasure. In Hebrew, and this is very important, the first part of the formula stated this way, Yaakov Bahar. In other words, if you were the biblical Joseph, you would not declare yourself to be a son of God, but a son of Jacob who is chosen by God. You would then have only one formula available to you, Yaakov Bahar. In Egyptian inscription practices, when you were running out of space and you had the same letter ending one word in the beginning of the other, you could save space by writing that letter once. Given the minimal space available on a ring, what we would expect to find on Joseph's royal ring is the term Yaakov Har, with the B serving in the last letter in Yaakov, and the first letter is Bahar. The A's and O's also wouldn't be there because Hebrew doesn't have any vowels, only consonants. So to sum up, the book of Genesis says that when Yaakov was raised to Pharaoh-like status, Pharaoh puts a signet ring in his hand. The biblical and rabbinical texts give us a formula for what that ring might state, YKBHR. Oh my God, what a load of baloney. How is this guy even a professor? In my previous blog on the subject, I argued that the Hyksos capital Avaris was probably named after Joseph. All right. In any event, the first century Jewish historian Josephus says at the time of Joseph, there was a Semitic people called Hyksos ruling Egypt's Nile Delta. Right. We know about that. They were the Canaanites who came down and took over Egypt for what? How long did the Hyksos rule over Egypt? 200, 300 years, something like that. Right. He identifies the Hyksos with the Israelites for over 4 decades. Professor Manfred Bitak has been digging at Avaris. It is there that he found a statue that may very well be linked to Yosef. The question is, has Professor Bitak found any royal signet rings? And the answer is yes. What is inscribed on them? YKBHR. Hasn't anyone noticed? I mean, after all, this is the only time that the name of the Israelite patriarch is inscribed on an Egyptian royal scarab. By the way, scarab, I think, relates to the word beetle, because these signet rings, I think, often had beetles on them, or they were in the shape of a beetle. Well, in fact, scholars have noticed that, but they have chose to dismiss the find. Jacob, they say, even though they have no evidence for this, was probably a common Canaanite name. HR, they say, is probably a reference to a mountain. Since Canaanites worship the god Baal on mountaintops, they say ring probably refers to some Canaanite ruler who was into Baal, but this is obviously pure fantasy. The ring doesn't mention Canaanites or Baal, rather it is inscribed in exactly what we would expect the royal ring of Joseph to state YKBHR. Professor Bietak has found 9 rings with Jacob's name on them. They were probably worn by Joseph and his court officials. Here we have perfect synchronicity between the Bible text and Egyptian archaeology. Joseph's royal ring has been found in a 37-year-old archaeological haystack. What a load of baloney. Oh my God. I don't understand how these people are become. He's an Israeli filmmaker and journalist, a 3-time Emmy winner for outstanding investigative journalism, a New York Times best-selling author, and an adjunct professor in the Department of Religion at Huntington University, Ontario, and he spouts such baloney? I mean, this is just absolute baloney. The guy's name is Simcha Jacobovici. Okay, it might be that the YKB is Yaakov, but to basically say that the signet ring must say Yaakov Bahar? That is just ridiculous. I don't even know how these people, I mean, it just goes to show, I'm sorry to say, how stupid people are that rise up to, positions of importance. God almighty, this is like embarrassing. It's so stupid. I mean, there's some nice archaeology mentioned in here, but his conclusion or his train of thought to prove that the ring must say Yaakov Bahar is just absolutely, it's ridiculous. And it also quotes rabbinical literature, which of course is, basically 2,000 years, 1,500 years later. Oh God, that's goodbye. That's embarrassing. Okay, so jeez, unbelievable the nonsense that people spout. Really, it's unbelievable. Okay. Any rate, Robert Alter was not spouting nonsense at all. So he describes that the signet ring and the string go together. I guess you could think of it as what do they call those things that were popular for a while? A bolo tie or something like that? Remember these things? Bolo tie? Don't see them around anywhere. Yeah, there we go. Something like that, maybe. Right? Something like that. Whatever. Anywho, so that okay, well, we read what Robert Alter had to say, and I think it was a very good explanation. So we're going to go on. So he took all of these official things. The staff also very possibly is an official thing, right? Staff is often used to represent leadership, right? Shevet Yehuda. The tribe is sometimes called Shevet, which literally means staff, but it's usually translated or understood as tribe. Okay. So verse 19, V'takam v'telech v'tasar sifa me'aleha v'tilbash bigdei almanuta. So there she finishes it off, and she has become pregnant from Yehuda. Vayeishlach Yehuda. Okay, so by the way, it's important to notice, a lot of times Yehuda is criticized for going to a prostitute, which I don't know what the social context was back then. It probably maybe didn't even have the same. Well, it certainly did have the same stigma, because it says that the daughters of Israel should not be prostitutes. Lo tihye kedesha bivnot Yisrael, right? So it's not a good thing. But one thing that I think is often overlooked, which we mentioned here, is that Yehuda is indeed a widow at the time that he goes to this prostitute. It already mentions that Utamat bat Shua eshet Yehuda, right? And maybe it mentions it specifically to show that his going to a prostitute is not like cheating on his wife, even though really polygamy and having concubines was obviously common back then. But still, he was a widow at the time he went to this prostitute, which turned out to be Tamar. Okay, verse 20. So now he takes the kid goat and sends it with his bud Hira. So he wants his pledge back, and she's nowhere to be found. And he asks around. He asks the people of her place. Ayek teshahi he. Ayeh hakadesha he ba'inayim al haderech. Where is this prostitute that was on the road to Einayim? And they said there's no prostitute around here. I guess prostitutes had their usual hangout places. I guess like even today, if you go to the red light district, that's maybe each prostitute has her own corner or something like that. So that was her corner, or that was her corner for trapping Yehuda. But she's not there as a regular. She doesn't have a regular shop there. Verse 22, Vayeishev el Yehuda. Vayeishav el Yehuda v'yomer lo matzatiha. So then Hira comes back and tells Yehuda that he couldn't find her. V'gam anshe makom amru lo hayta b'zeh kedesha. And the people there told me there's no prostitute here. Verse 23, v'yomer Yehuda tikach la pen niyeh labuz. And Yehuda said, "Kach la pen nihye labuz." Take it to her, lest we become an embarrassment. Hine shalachti agdi hazeh v'ata lo matzata. So I'm not sure what this is saying here. Tikach la pen nihye labuz. What is this tikach la? Okay, let's look at Robert Alter. See what he has to say about that. Verse 22, verse 23. Okay. Yomer Yehuda tikachla. She should let her take it for herself. In other words, let her keep it. Pen nieh labuz, lest we become a laughing stock, or lest we become an embarrassment. Well, this is interesting because this again implies that there was some shame associated with going to a prostitute, right? If everyone would find out, then we will become an embarrassment. And interesting how he says we will become an embarrassment. So like this guy Hira is now like basically I guess part of his household, or his they're palling around together for a long time, because it mentions at the beginning of the chapter as well. Because okay, verse 24, like he mishalosh hadashim vayugal Yehuda lemor zantat tamar kalatecha. And 3 months later, it was told to Yehuda that your daughter-in-law Tamar was being promiscuous, or was literally being a prostitute, acting as a prostitute. V'gam, I think it means in this case just fooling around, being promiscuous. V'gam hine haral is nunim. And she has become pregnant through her promiscuity, or alternatively through her prostitution. Yomer Yehuda hotziuha wa tisaref. And Yehuda said, bring her out, and she will be burnt. Well, this is interesting because the daughter of a Kohen, the Kohen Gadol, is it a Kohen or Kohen Gadol? I think it's actually Kohen daughter. Okay, here we go. Leviticus 21:9. So this brings says Uvat ish kohen ki techel liznot et aviha hi michalelet ba'esh tisaref. Interesting. Leviticus 21:9. Let's look at English for 1 second. So this is the laws of cleanliness for the priests. Shaving. Right. So I'll read it in English just for a second, or we'll look at it in English and I'll pick it up in Hebrew where I want to. So let's start over here in verse 7. So this is the law for priests, for Kohanim. So they must not marry a woman defiled by prostitution or divorced from their husbands. This verse we want to look at. If a priest's daughter defiles herself by becoming a prostitute, she disgraces her father, she must be burned in the fire. And then the Kohen Gadol must marry a virgin. Okay, let's go back for a second. So we'll pick this up in the Hebrew. So verse 9. בת איש כהן כי תחל לזנות את אביה היא מחללת באש תשרף. So this relates almost directly to the same thing that's happening here with Yehuda. Okay, well, this is the daughter of a Kohen, not just the Kohen Gadol, but any Kohen who is promiscuous while in her father's house, or who acts as a prostitute, or is a prostitute while in her father's house. I think it just means promiscuous. Ba'esh tisaref, she's to be burnt in fire. And here we have in Genesis 38, so that was Leviticus 21:9. In Genesis 38, we have the same language, right? Your daughter-in-law was acting as a prostitute or is being promiscuous. And she has become pregnant through her prostitution, through her promiscuity. Take her out and let her be burnt, and she shall be burnt. Okay? So it's the same kind of punishment that's later ingrained into law, not for any daughter of Israel, but for the daughter of a Kohen, right? Burning by fire for acting as a prostitute or by being promiscuous in your father's house, making it well, it actually says in Leviticus 21, he basically profanes she profanes her father's house, right? She makes a mockery of her father's house. She makes embarrassment or disgrace for her father's house. Kind of reminds me of the show Married with Children, right? With the daughter Kelly. So Kelly is portrayed as being quite promiscuous, but Al, the father, whenever a boyfriend comes over and the boyfriend wants to mess around with Kelly, Al will always take him and bang him against the wall and beat him up and then throw him out of the house because he knows that if by Kelly acting like a slut while she's in her father's house, while she's living in her father's house, it's an embarrassment. It's a a disgrace to her father, right? It's the same thing here. Hi michalelet. Okay. Wahi mutzet. Okay, so verse 25. Hi mutzet wahi shalcha el hamiha. Lemor li'ish asher ela lo anochi hara. So when she was taken out, and she sent word to her father-in-law saying, "Leisha, excuse me, leisha sher ela lo anochi hara." Whoever these belong to, basically, that's the one who I've become pregnant by. Otomer hakar hakerna lemi achotemet v'haptilim v'hamata mate ha'ele. Which again shows here that mate and shevet are interchangeable. They're synonyms because before it uses the word shevet. So, and a lot of times the tribe is called the mate, and a lot of times it's called the shevet. Two interchangeable words, which both mean a staff. So he basically sends word to Yehuda saying, can you please tell me who these things belong to? This signet ring and string and cord and this staff. Verse 26, Vayikir Yehuda, Yomer tzadka mimeni ki al ken lo nitatiha l'shela b'ni v'lo yasaf od l'da'ata. So Yehuda recognizes that he's the one responsible for this, and now he understands what's been going on. That's why Tamar did this. She was waiting around for Shelah. Remember, she's not a married woman, and Yehuda is not a married man. Both are widows/widowers. And so she's not married at this point, right? It's not like she's maybe betrothed or going to be betrothed to Shelah, but she's not married to Shelah. So she hasn't committed adultery, according to Torah. She's not a married woman who slept with a man other than her husband. So Yehuda realizes the whole story now, and Yomer Yehuda, Yeker Yehuda, Yomer tzadka mimeni. So this is the key phrase. He said, she's more righteous than I am. Tzadka mimeni. Ki al ken, because I did not give her Shelah, my son, velo yisaf od ladata, and he no longer, and that was the last time he had relations with her. Okay. So let me close this out. What, Vol? Yep. She didn't get. That's the whole thing. She was waiting when Onan died. Yehuda says to Tamar, "Go back home, be a widow in your father's house, and wait until Shelah, my third son, to grow up." But she hadn't been given, so she's waiting to be given to Shelah because she wants to have children. Oh. And Yehuda will not give her to Shelah because Yehuda says, "Listen, she's already killed off two of my sons. This woman obviously has the touch of death on her. So I'm not going to rush. I'm in no hurry to give her to Shelah." So he's delaying, and Tamar's obviously running out of time. She wants to have children. She's had no children, right? All she's done is been with two husbands who died, and so then that's when she dresses up as the prostitute and tricks Yehuda. Got it now? Babitna. And so it was at the time it was time for her to give birth, and there were twins in her womb. Wahi belidata oiten yad. ותיקח המילד וקשור על ידו שני. Lemor ze yatsa rishona. So a hand stuck out of the where, and and the mialedet, the midwife, tied a crimson, whatchamacall, not crimson, a scarlet thread on that hand, and he's now the firstborn, right? He was the one who stuck a body part out first, even though it was just a hand. ויהי כמשיב ידו, והנה יצא אחיו, ותאמר מה פרצת? And then he put his hand back in. I mean, God, no one. I don't even want to. Right? You don't want to bring this image up in your mind, but okay, it's quite graphic. He's pulled his hand back in, and then his brother came out. ותאמר מה פרצת עליך? מה פרצת עליך פרץ? Basically, like, how you bursted out of there, like, wow, you really bursted yourself out of there. ויקרא שמו פרץ, and she called his name Paretz. אחר יצא אחיו אשר על ידו השני ויקרא שמו זרח. So here we have Peretz and Zarach and Zerach. Peretz and Zerach. I have to plug in my battery, but let's take a look very quickly. Well, while I charge my battery, you can contemplate on these verses right here. And I'll be right back. Alrighty, so we're back. So the genealogy of David. This is the family line of Peretz. So Peretz was the second one to come out, right? Burst out, twins. Does it remind us kind of Esav and Yaakov, right? Yaakov came out grasping Esav's heel. They were also twins, right? And then actually the first one to come out, Esav was overtaken by Yaakov, right? In fact, Esav then later on mentions this is a reason for Yaakov's name, although that was not the original reason. But so Yaakov basically exceeds Esav. He takes over he becomes the firstborn. He buys the it's interesting. Oh, maybe I'll even go to that verse in a second because it's interesting the way that it's all played out with the name Yaakov, etc. But so we have a not exactly similar situation here, but first we have Zerach sticks his hand out, then brings it back. Then Peretz comes out, and then Zerach comes out. So really, Zerach is the firstborn, right? But it's from the line of Peretz that we get David. We don't really hear much about Peretz and Zerach afterwards at all. In fact, Peretz. No, that's not what I wanted. Yeah, so it goes right to Ruth and Chronicles. It's kind of a similar story, right? Twins, and then the first one becomes the well, in this case, the first one doesn't become the second one. Well, I guess kind of you could say, because it was really Peretz who came out first, but he's considered the second born because first Zerach stuck his hand out. So there's definitely some interplay with twins. There's definitely some overlap or some hearkening back, I would say, to the story between Esav and Yaakov. And in this case, Peretz becomes, I guess, based on his descendants, becomes the firstborn or the important one at any rate. So Peretz was the father of Chetzron, who was the father of Ram, father of Aminadav, the father of Nachshon, the father of Salmon, the father of Boaz, the father of Oved, the father of Yishai, the father of David, right? So Boaz, we all know the story of Boaz. Boaz married Ruth, and they gave birth to Oved, which it mentions. Naomi had a son, they called him Oved. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So from the line of Peretz comes David eventually. So who is Peretz? Peretz is the son of a woman whose two first husbands died and then who dressed up as a prostitute to trick her and then had sex with her father-in-law to trick him into having a son. That's the fatherly side of David. The motherly side of David, Ruth, at least the generation. Ruth is a Moabite. Ammon are descendants of Lot from an incestuous relationship that Lot's daughters had with him after they thought the entire world had been destroyed. So from these ignominious beginnings came the greatest king of all of ancient Israel, David, and his son also, Solomon. Shlomo came from very ignominious beginnings, right? He was the product of an adulterous relationship between David and Bathsheba. So, what do we learn from all this? We learn that God is very forgiving, God is very merciful, and God does not, and Yehovah does not expect perfection from people. That Yehovah expects, knows that we're all human beings and we make mistakes, sometimes very serious mistakes. And He's not an elitist. He doesn't expect Christianity. We expect Jesus's mother to be a virgin, right? And we expect the Immaculate Conception. What does that mean again? I always forget. That's later by the Catholics. Okay, what does it mean?
She was born. That Mary herself was born without sin.
Mary herself was born without sin, meaning she was not conceived in a regular way.
Yeah, I think her mother was barren.
Her mother was barren.
Yeah.
So then, okay,
Elderly when she had her,
an elderly. What was Mary's mother's name, according to the Catholic Church?
in English, they often say Anne, but
Anne?
it would have been Hannah.
Hannah. Okay. Okie doke. Well, in Christianity, we expect this kind of human perfection to give birth to our I won't say our, God forbid. They expect, our in the figurative sense. They expect a human perfection to give birth to their gods and their messiahs, and we don't. We understand that humans make lots of mistakes, but they can always redeem themselves, and the good can come out of the bad. Shlomo came out of David and Bathsheba. David came out of Peretz and Ruth, and etc., etc. Okay, so let's close that out. So I think what I'm going to do now to finish off, it's getting late. I'm just going to read straight through without any more commentary, unless there's something very, very important that I want to say. ויוסף הורד מצרימה, ויחנהו פוטיפר, סריס פרעה, שר הטבחים, איש מצרי מיד הישמעאלים. Oh, that's interesting. אשר הורידוהו shama, right? So now it's saying Ishmaelim, not Midianim. Wahi Yehovah et Yosef. Wahi ish matzliach. Wahi beveit Adonav HaMisri. Wayar Adonav ki Yehovah ito. V'chol asher hu asa oseh Yehovah matzliach biado. Oyimsa Yosef chayin be'enav. Wayisharet oto yafkidehu al beito. One second here. Just 4. Okay. Just want to see how they translated something into English. ויפקידהו על ביתו בכל יש לו נתן בידו. ויהי מאז הפקיד אותו בביתו ועל כל אשר יש לו. ויברך יהוה את בית המצרי בגלל יוסף. ויהי ברכת יהוה בכל אשר יש לו בבית ובשדה. ויעזוב כל אשר לו ביד יוסף ולא ידע איתו מאומה כי אם הלחם אשר הוא אוכל. ויהי יוסף יפה תואר ויפה מראה. אחר הדברים האלה ותישא אשת אדוניו את עיניה אל יוסף ותאמר שכבה עמי. וימאן ויאמר אל אשת אדוניו הן אדוני לא ידע איתי מה בבית וכל אשר יש לו נתן בידי איננו גדול בבית הזה ממני. I have to sneeze. excuse me, ולא חסך ממני מאומה, כי אם אותך באשר את אשתו, ואיך אעשה הרעה הגדולה הזאת, וחטאתי לאלוהים. Verse 10, ויהי כי דברה אל יוסף יום יום, ולא שמע אליה לשכב אצלה להיות עמה, ויהי כי היום הזה ויבוא הביתה לעשות מלאכתו, ואין איש מאנשי הבית שם בבית, ותתפשהו בבגדו, לאמור שכבה עמי, ויעזוב בגדו בידיו ינס, ויצא החוצה. ויהי כראותה, כי עזב בגדו בידיו ינס החוצה. ותקרא לאנשי ביתה, ותאמר להם לאמור, ראו, הביא לנו איש עברי, צחק בנו, בא אליי, לשכב עמי, וקרא בקול גדול. ויהי כי שמעו, כי הרים אותי קול, ואקרא, ויעזוב בגדו אצלי, וינס ויצא החוצה. I just want to see one thing. One second. Okay, I just want to see something. איש עברי, צחק בנו, בא אליי לשכב עמי, וקרא בקול גדול. So this was the ancient Egyptian Me Too movement. ויהי כי שמעו, כי הרים אותי קול, ויקרא ויעזוב בגדו אצלי, וינס ויצא החוצה, ותנח בגדו אצלה, עד בו אדוניו אל ביתו. What a bitch. What an effing bitch, man. Sorry. It's the only way I can say it. False accusations of rape. Boy, how the times have not changed, right? Especially with this Me Too movement. ותדבר אליו כדברים האלה. לאמור בא אליי, העבד העברי אשר הבאת לנו, לצחק בי. ויהי כי הרימי קולי, ויקרא ויעזוב בגדו אצלי, וינס החוצה. ויהי כי שמע אדוניו את דברי אשתו, אשר דיברה אליו, לאמור, כדברים האלה עשה לי עבדך, החרה פה. So let's think about it psychologically, right? I mean, let's say Joseph were to proclaim in his case his innocence, that no, he did not try to rape Potiphar's wife, that in fact it was Potiphar's wife who tried to seduce him. Well, what would that entail? If Potiphar were to even entertain the idea of believing Yosef, what would that say about his wife, right? He would have to admit the fact that his wife wants Yosef more than him, or that his wife did all these horrible things, or that, now he's got to divorce her or kill her, So I guess one could say, psychologically speaking, it was not in his best interest to even entertain the idea that Yosef, that Yosef was would have, that Yosef was the one who was the victim, not Potiphar's wife, right? Yosef doesn't even try to explain it. As a matter of fact, I think Yosef understood. This is speculation. I can't glean this from the text, but it's possible that Yosef understood that there was really no point in explaining it, because Potiphar wouldn't have believed him anyway. And not only that, if Yosef did try to say that, now he would be accusing Potiphar's wife of a horrible act, right? And then that would really anger Potiphar. So Potiphar was already mad at him because he believed that Yosef was seducing his wife. But now if Yosef were to come back and say, listen, I didn't do it, it's your wife, she tried to seduce me. Not only are you trying to, did you try to rape my wife, but now you're blaming her? Right? It almost reminds us of the story in Esther, where Esther falls on the, where Haman falls on the couch of Esther. And then the king comes back in. And he says, not only what you've done, but now you're trying to sleep with my wife, right? And that pushes him over the edge, basically. And Achashverosh at that time basically decides to kill Haman, right? Maybe we should even look at that for comparison, very briefly. So that's Esther, chapter 6-ish. Let's go for 6. Not quite. 7. So this is the second banquet. I'll just do it in the English to save some time. Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given even up to half the kingdom. Queen Esther answered, if I found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we'd merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, but no such distress justified disturbing the king. King Xerxes answered Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing? Esther said, an adversary and an enemy, this vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage. So the king is now enraged because Haman wants to kill Esther and his, this new queen that he loves, and all of her people. Left his wine and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, a pole reaching to 50, etc., etc. And they hanged Haman. So it's the same kind of thing, right? So Haman, well, it's not exactly the same, but Haman, by attempting to proclaim his innocence, so the king Achashverosh was already pushed over the edge. And now Haman, in trying to proclaim his innocence, is mistaken, is basically kind of, well, it's clear from the text, right? That now the king comes back and thinks that Haman is not only doing that, but wants to have sex with Esther, and that really pushes over the edge. And then right away he's covered, his face is covered, and he's led off to the gallows, right? Al Qaeda, ISIS style, I suppose. So Well, it's not exactly the same thing, but there is some relationship that in each case, the idea that the king would have thought, well, it's not exactly the same. I can't even say it is. But at any rate, nonetheless, getting back to what I was saying before, I think that's why Yosef didn't protest at all, because that would have only, so the king at this point is going to put him in jail, right? The king is, I mean, not the king. Potiphar is obviously very angry. V'yachar apo. Literally his flames came out of his mouth, out of his nose. But I guess Yosef might have been thinking at this point, let me just leave it and take my punishment, because if I now do even worse and I accuse the queen of seducing me, then that's really going to push the king over the edge, because he's not going to believe me. He's going to believe his wife, because there'd be too much psychologically or at risk for him to believe me over his wife. What, he's going to believe some Hebrew slave who he didn't even know a couple of years ago, and now over his own wife, his own beloved wife, and now he's going to have to believe that his wife likes the slave more than he likes Potiphar. And not only that, maybe now he's even going to have to divorce his wife or kill his wife, or who knows what, because she tried to seduce Yosef. So I think Yosef might have, this is complete speculation, but I'm just trying to think what might have gone on here. Why didn't Yosef protest? That might have been the reason. He might have said, listen, if I protest, Potiphar's not going to believe me anyway, and it's only going to inflame him even worse. He's going to think that now I'm trying to blame it on his wife and cast aspersions on his wife, and then he's going to just kill me outright. So I better just shut my mouth and take my punishment. And so that's what he does. Okay. So ויקח אדוני יוסף אותו, ויתנהו אל בית הסוהר, מקום אשר אסירי המלך אסורים, ויהי שם בבית הסוהר. Verse 21, ויהי יהוה את יוסף, ויית אליו חסד, ויתן חינו בעיני שר בית הסוהר. ויתן שר בית הסוהר ביד יוסף את כל האסירים אשר בבית הסוהר, ואת כל אשר עושים שם הוא היה עושה. So Yosef is now in charge of the prison. Just as he was in charge of Potiphar's house, now he's in charge of the prison. And in both cases, it's mentioned that it's because Yoah blessed him or was with him. Verse 23, Ein sar beit soar ro'eh et kol me'umah. Just the same as was said about Potiphar's house, right? Over here, where was it? ויעזוב כל אשר לא ביד יוסף ולא ידע איתו מאומה כי אם הלחם אשר הוא אוכל. So basically Potiphar didn't have to worry about a thing. He left everything in Yosef's hands, and the word there is used מאומה. The same thing here. So roed kol מאומה בידו. He left everything in his hands. באשר יהוה איתו, because Yehovah was with him. אשר הוא עושה יהוה מצליח. And everything he did, Yehovah made successful. So in the blessing of God, of Yehovah, in each case, allowed Yosef to rise to the top in his various enslavements, right? And the same thing happens in the end with Pharaoh. He rises to second in command of Pharaoh. So everywhere he goes, he's still enslaved by Pharaoh in a sense, right? He's not in his own land. He's not with his father. He's not with his family. He's in this foreign land, and he was brought out of the prison, but he's still kind of, beholden to Pharaoh. He's still kind of a slave to Pharaoh, but he rises up to the top of the house of Pharaoh because of interpretation of his dreams. So he's like the highest among the low in each case. Genesis 40, and we'll read to the end of this, and then we'll stop. ויהי אחר הדברים האלה, עטו משכנותיהם ופא לאדוניהם למלך מצרים, ויקצוף פרעה על שני סריסיו, על שר המשין ועל שר האופים, ויתן אותם במשמר בית שר הטבחים אל בית הסוהר, מקום אשר יוסף אסור שם, ויפקוד שר הטבחים את יוסף איתם, וישרת אותם, ויהי ימים במשמר, ויחלמו חלום שניהם, איש חלומו בלילה אחד, איש כפתרון חלומו. חלומו, המשקה והאופה אשר למלך מצרים, אשר אסורים בבית הסוהר. הוא יבוא עליהם יוסף בבוקר וירא אותם, והנה זועפים. וישאל את סריסי פרעה אשר איתו במשמר בית אדוניו לאמור, מדוע פניכם רעים היום? verse 8, ויאמרו אליו, חלום חלמנו, פותר אין אותו. יאמר עליהם יוסף, הלא לאלוהים פתרונים? ספרו נא לי. verse 9, ויספר שר המשקים את חלומו ליוסף, ויאמר לו בחלומי, והנה גפן לפניי. ובגפן שלושה סריגים. Sirigim are like branches. How do they translate it? Yeah, branches. One second. Yeah. Okay, well, he כי פורחת עלתה ניצה, הבשילו אשכולותיה ענבים. ואחוז פרעה בידי, ויקח את ענבים, ואשחט אותם, אסחט אותם, not אשחט, excuse me, לסחוט, to squeeze, אותם אל כוס פרעה, ויתן את הכוס על כף פרעה. ויאמר לו יוסף, זה פתרונו, שלושת הסריגים שלושת ימים הם, בעוד שלושת ימים יישא פרעה את ראשך והשיבך על קניך ונתת קניך. Related also to Shevet in Mateh. A kaneh is like a staff. Base, pedestal, office. Literally, base or pedestal. Okay. Kano. But kano means like a second. Yeah, it stands. So it's like in the shape of a staff, right? So we mentioned before, Shevet is a staff. Mateh is a staff. Those were the two words that were used to describe the staff that Yehuda had given to Tamar as a pledge. And we know that Shevet and Mateh are words for basically for tribe and they so therefore they represent the person who holds the staff, represents the head of the tribe, right? Or it represents the official, power of the tribe, the staff. So here we have the word kaneh, which is similar. Okay, so it's a stand, it's like a staff. But here it's being also used to represent office or position of power, just like Mateh and Shevet are, I believe. Okay, ונתת כוס פרעה בידו כמשפט הראשון אשר היית משקהו. Verse 14, כי אם זכרתני איתך כאשר ייטב לך ועשית נא עמדי חסד וזכרתני והזכרתני אל פרעה והוצאתני מן הבית הזה כי גונבתי מארץ העברים וגם פה לא עשיתי מאומה כי שמו אותי בבור. I didn't do a mi'umah. The word mi'umah is used again. That's the same word that was used. Potiphar didn't worry about a thing. The word there used is he didn't worry about a mi'umah. And the head of the Sarat Tabachim, the head of the jail, didn't worry about a mi'umah, didn't worry about a thing, a single thing. How do they translate mi'umah here? Anything, right? Because Yosef had because he trusted Yosef, and later on he's not going to worry about a thing. He puts everything in Yosef's hand, makes him second command. And here it says, I didn't do a mi'umah. It's the same word. I don't know if that's like a theme that's on purpose. A lot of times you'll see the same word occurring in a story that's almost becomes like the theme of the story. It might be here that mi'umah is one of the themes of the story. I didn't do a thing, right? Potiphar didn't worry about a thing. the Sada Tabachim, the head of the jail, didn't worry about a thing, and I didn't do a thing. I didn't do anything. Kisamu oti babor. Verse 16. We are Sar Ha'ofim Kitov Batar Yomer El Yosef. So it's such brilliant, like psychologically here, right? So the first one to speak up was the cupbearer, and he gets a good report. So the baker says, "Oh, okay, Yosef's giving a good report. Let me now hear my interpretation. It's maybe it's this guy gives good reports." Well, bad mistake. He should have kept his mouth shut. Or yeah, I'm not sure how to put it into words, but I hope everyone knows what I'm trying to say. So the head of the bakers saw that Yosef had given a good interpretation. Yomer El Yosef, and so he said to Joseph, Afani b'chalomi. Also, I had a dream. Wahine shlosha, or also in my dream, Wahine shlosha saleh hari al roshi. 3 baskets of, they should translate this as white flour. Chor is white. Chori is white, right? Wow, is that the only place? I thought there was another place. Havar. Interesting. I thought it appeared in more places. Okay, so it's a what's the fancy word? Hapax legomenon. Hori appears only once. Well, the verb form seems to appear twice more. Any rate, so where were we? Okay. Al Roshi. Usala Elyon Mikol Ma'chal Paro Ma'se Ufe. So he has 3 baskets on his head. They're filled with white bread on the top basket. The birds are picking at the white bread. Ya'an Yosef Yomer Ze Pitrono. He should have shut up. He should have realized this is not going to be a good interpretation. The birds were picking at the bread in his dream. Ze Pitrono. Shloshet Asalim Shloshit Yamim Heim. The 3 baskets are 3 days, just as the 3 grape branches were 3 days for the cupbearer. Ba'od Shloshit Yamim, in another 3 days, Yisa Parot Roshcha Me Alecha. I love this. This is one of my favorite verses. It's really hilarious, actually, because what does he say to the? He says to the Sar Amashke. So right, they have similar dreams, but it's like they're like reflections of each other. They're like like polar opposites of each other, but they're reflections, basically. Reflections across the y-axis or across the x-axis. One's positive, one's negative, but they're the same. Okay, so where was it? Yamim Haim. Okay, so Shloshit Hasarigim, Shloshit Yamim Haim. Here, the 3 branches, grape branches or vine branches, are 3 days. In 3 days, Paro, it literally says, will lift up your head, and return you to your position. When atatacos Paro biado, and you will hand Paro the kos, you will give Paro the cup into his hand, right? So it says, but the key here is Yisa Paro et roshecha. Paro will lift up your head. This is a phrase you see many times throughout the Tanakh, and it basically means, how would I describe it? To give favor to you. You could picture it. It's a person's head is hanging down, and then Pharaoh comes and lifts it up. Okay, we saw this a couple of weeks ago. This exact same phrase. I'm trying to remember exactly where. So with Ace, I don't remember now, but we saw this. It's in the in the priestly blessing. Numbers 6:23. Whoa. There we go. Taber el Ahron, and here we go. Isa Yehovah panav elecha. So literally here, Yehovah, well, not literally, figuratively, because Yehovah does not have a face. Yehovah will lift his face up to you, V'sem lecha shalom, and will place upon you peace. Right, so lifting up the face. Well, in this case here, it's someone lifting up someone else's face, right? But it's the same imagery. So here, the od shloshet. So now we're talking about the baker, the head baker and candlestick maker. Od shloshet yamim yisa paro et roshcha me alecha. So here it says. בעוד 3 ימים יישא פרעה את ראשך, and here it says בעוד 3 ימים יישא את ראש, I'm sorry, בעוד 3 ימים יישא פרעה את ראשך מעליך. So in the first place it said we'll lift up your head, and here it says we'll lift your head up off of you. It's really fun. It's really kind of humorous, actually. The whole story here is like the baker decides to press his luck. He sees that the cupbearer got a good report, so he says, "Let's go for it." Let me hear my report, and it's not good. And above it says he will lift up his head, and here it says he will lift his head up off of him. And will hang you on a tree, on wood, and the fowl, the flying thingies, will eat your flesh off of you, just as in the dream the birds were eating the bread on the top basket. Verse 20, and it was on the third day, Pharaoh's birthday, right? There we go. There's the Pharaoh's birthday that we've spoken about a number of times. And he made a great festival, a great feast, a great, how do they call it? Yeah, feast, right? What's the word? Feast. Lechol, banquet. I'm thinking of another word, but I can't think. Yeah, banquet, I guess. Mishte lechol avadav. He made a great banquet for all of his servants. We saw et rosh sar hamashkim. And he lifted up the head of the cupbearer, v'torosh sara ofim, b'toch avadav, and he basically drew attention, or basically brought them out of the dungeon. V'shev et sara mashkim al mashkehu, and he returned the cupbearer to his cup, to his drinks, the drink bearer to his drinks. Wa'iten akos al kaf paro, and he placed the cup into Pharaoh's hand, right? So he was restored to his position, just as was predicted. And the baker he hanged, just as Yosef had solved or had predicted for them. Verse 23, Velo Zachar Sar Hamashkim et Yosef wa ish kachehu, and the heir did not remember Yosef, but forgot him. And here, this is exactly a kind of place where the rabbis would say something stupid like, "Oh, It's enough for the Torah to say "Velo sachar Sarah mashkim et Yosef," that the cupbearer did not remember Yosef. Why does it also have to say "and forgot him"? Right? Obviously, this is an extra word that the Torah is giving us, and it's has some hidden meaning, because it's enough just to say that he forgot him, or that he didn't remember him, and it doesn't have to say he didn't remember him but forgot him. Of course, as Karaites and as hopefully more intelligent readers of the Torah, we know that this is just to emphasize, right? Emphasize that he completely forgot about him. It would be like saying in English, it would be like saying in English that the cupbearer completely forgot about Yosef. Well, it's enough to say forgot about Yosef. Why do we have to say completely forgot about Yosef? To emphasize, right, that here's this guy whose life was saved by Yosef. Well, it wasn't saved by Yosef, but it was given the proper interpretation, and it came true. And really, this guy kind of owes a lot to Yosef for interpreting his dream and telling him what's going to happen. And he gets into a good spot, and he just completely forgets his debt that he owes to Yosef, right? So it's emphasizing it by saying Zachar and Vayishkachehu. It really emphasizes the point that he should have really, what a jerk he was, or what a selfish, person he was, for completely forgetting about Yosef and when he didn't need him anymore. And so that's why it says Lo Zachar Vayishkachehu. Let's just finish off by looking at Rashi on that, just to see how the rabbis interpret it, and see how bizarre their interpretations do. I don't know what the Rashi is going to say. We'll find out right now. So this is Genesis 40:23. ולא שכר המשקים, וישכחהו. לאחר מכן, מפני שתלה בו יוסף לזכרו, חוזקק להיות אסור 2 שנים, שנאמר אשרי הגבר אשר שם השם מבטחו ולא פנה אל רחבים, ולא בטח על מצרים הקרויים רחב. Okay, so he's saying something different. So he's not even relating to the fact that it says ולא זכר שר המשקים בו ביום. Okay, that's clear. So לאחר מכן, and afterwards, okay, I see. So it is saying, okay. So he's saying, so Rashi is saying, Lo zachar sara mashkim bo bayom. So on the same day, I guess on the day that he was restored to his office, the cupbearer did not remember him. And afterwards, he continued to forget him, I guess is what Rashi is saying. Why? Because Joseph depended on him to remember him. In other words, Joseph was depending on this cupbearer to remind him, to remember him and to mention him to Pharaoh. So therefore, he was required to be imprisoned for another 2 years. As it is said, as it is said in Psalms 40, happy is the man who places God as his trust, as the one he trusts, and who does not turn to the Rahavim. I don't know what the Rahavim are. Here they translate it as the arrogant. Okay. ולא בטח על מצרים הקרויים רהב. So in other words, happy is the man who did not rely on Egyptians, meaning Hakruyim Rahav, who are called arrogant. Okay, so basically what Rashi's saying is that because Yosef decided to rely not on God, Ashrei Gever Asher Sam Hashem Mivtacho, but instead decided to rely on this Egyptian to remind him, to mention him to Pharaoh. So his punishment was Yosef's punishment was that he had to stay in jail for another 2 years. This is a ridiculous commentary, honestly. This is a ridiculous commentary. But Rashi does give an explanation, as I kind of expected, that why it says both lo zachar and v'yishkachehu, right? Lo zachar bo bayom, v'yishkachehu lechar mikein. That's basically the explanation. You didn't remember on that day. Also, that's not what's written in the text. The text says did not remember and forgot for emphasis and to show how extreme it is for this person, this cupbearer, to forget, the Sarah Mashkim, to forget Yosef after all that Yosef had done for him. So with that being said, we shall end today's study. And I hope everyone's enjoying it. No, I don't like this one. Oops. All right, I'll do this one. Even though it's not biblical. I like this one.
כתוב בתורה הקדושה, אנוכי אסתיר פניי, ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא. אבל רבי נחמן מסביר.
So, I'll just say goodbye. We'll go out with this song, which has nothing to do with Tanakh. It's Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, but I like the song, so. And it's a nice message, actually.
בוודאי גם שם נמצא השם יתברך ואפילו בהסתר.
So, thank you for joining the study, and we will see you again. Biz'arat Yehovah, we will see you again next week.
בוודאי גם שם נמצא השם יתברך אפילו בהסתרה שבתוך ההסתרה בוודאי גם שם נמצא השם יתברך ואפילו בהסתרה שבתוך ההסתרה בוודאי גם שם נמצא השם יתברך. אוי 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 גם מאחורי הדברים הקשים העוברים עליך אני עומד, אני עומד, אני עומד גם מאחורי הדברים הקשים העוברים עליך אני עומד, אני עומד, אני עומד אוי 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 גם מאחורי הדברים הקשים העוברים עליך אני עומד, אני עומד, אני עומד גם מאחורי הדברים הקשים העוברים עליך אני עומד, אני עומד, אני עומד
ואפילו בהסתרה ובתוך ההסתרה בוודאי גם שם נמצא השם יתברך ואפילו בהסתרה שבתוך ההסתרה בוודאי גם שם נמצא השם יתברך
אוי אוי אוי, גם מאחורי הדברים הקשים העוברים עליך. אני עומד, אני עומד, אני עומד. גם מאחורי הדברים הקשים העוברים עליך. אני עומד, אני עומד, אני עומד.